The way you carry yourself is how people will remember you later on. Even if it's your first job, take them all seriously. Nothing is a stepping stone. You may be there for a while, maybe the longest stepping stone or phase of your career. Do good in making your character stand out. And I think that pays dividends later on.
How many people go through life doing work they really don't like, but every day dreaming of, say, working in the aviation industry? They say it's too late. They think it would be too hard. They think it would go against conventional norms. If you never go after what you want, you'll never have it. This is Fly the Transition. Join us as we soar through the captivating stories of individuals embracing a thrilling journey into the aviation industry. From pilots spreading their wings to mechanics fine-tuning the engines and a myriad of industry professionals, each with a unique tale to tell. Get ready to dive into the diverse backgrounds, the pivotal moments that propelled their leap, and the sheer determination that transformed their aspirations into reality. We're not just about dreams. We're about making them take flight. Welcome to Fly the Transition. And now your host, Jim Schilling.
Welcome back, all my aviation friends, to another episode of Fly the Transition, where we will explore yet another journey of aviation career transformation. Now, unless you've been living under some kind of aviation podcasting rock, then you definitely recognize the voice at the intro of this episode. That's right, it's super exciting for me to have him on. It is the one and only Romeo Hotel, or RH, from the chart-topping aviation podcast Opposing Bases, Air Traffic Talk. I myself am a listener and a huge fan of what AG and RH do over on Opposing Bases. If you have not checked out that podcast, which I highly doubt if you're listening to an aviation podcast, go check those guys out over at Opposing Bases. They cover a lot of really great stuff in aviation and have a unique take from both the controller and pilot perspective. So it's really humbling for me, and I'm really excited to be able to welcome RH onto my podcast to talk about the couple of turns he's taken in his own career in aviation. So since it's been a couple of weeks since a traditional episode, I do have one review to give you. This one from over on Spotify from Andy. Andy says, "This is a great podcast. Thanks so much for taking the time to do the work necessary to make them happen. Being 42 and 23 years into a career in aviation, being surrounded by pilots all the time, I've finally realized I'm in the right place, but doing the wrong thing. These stories are very helpful. Keep it up." Well, Andy, thanks first of all for taking the time to share some kind words with me about the podcast. And whatever it is you're doing in aviation, I hope that this has been inspiring to you to make you go from being in the right place doing the wrong thing to being in the right place moving towards doing the right thing for you. Thanks again, and good luck in your journey. If you would like to have a review read on the podcast, you can leave me a review and a rating wherever you're listening to this podcast, be it on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. Please leave a 5-star rating if you're going to leave a rating, and then a kind review, and I'd be happy to read that on a future episode. All right, so this was a really fun interview, and I'm not going to waste any time getting into it. I'm happy to welcome Romeo Hotel from Opposing Bases, also a rookie first officer at the quote-unquote Penguin Airlines. If you know, you know. RH has had the opportunity to have a number of careers in aviation, starting out first as a flight instructor and then moving into a regional carrier flying the CRJ. And after some furloughs, he was able to transition into the space of air traffic control, and most recently working his way into being a rookie first officer with a major airlines. He's going to talk to us a bit about the intricacies of each of those roles, as well as the routes he took to get there. So without further ado, the one and only Romeo Hotel. Well, RH, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition. It's going to be a little bit different than some episodes because you started in aviation as far as getting into the 121 gig, and then you went to controller life, and then back over to 121, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. A little bit of a twisted turn in the road of my career, if you will.
But I think from like our perspective, I think that'll be really cool to hear how things progressed the first time you went into the aviation side, and then now you transition over to controller. And now how are things maybe different as you go into the world again? And we'll get into that here in a few minutes.
Okay.
But, I think the best way to start is, how were you first exposed to aviation?
probably like a lot of your listeners as a kid, air shows. Went to the Reno air races when I was a kid. I'm sure I saw either the Thunderbirds or the Blue Angels or something like that that got me into airplanes at a young age. And I remember my first plane rides as a kid going to Disneyland or Disney World with my grandparents. I loved that. From as early as probably 10, I remember loving airplanes. And I didn't really think about it as a career until I got out of college. I started taking flying lessons on the weekends, Part 61 at an airport that was close to my house. I flew 2 to 3 times a month. Got my private in about 2 years, a little less than 2 years it took me.
Okay.
With weather challenges, and 9/11 happened in the middle of my private training.
That'll put a damper on it as well.
Right. So I'm aging myself a little bit, but that was an ongoing issue back then and new. Mm-hmm. And then when I got done with my private, I realized that's all I wanted to do and talk about was flying. And
the bug bit you hard.
The bug bit me hard. And I started doing some homework and found a couple opportunities that required a move, and eventually packed up, moved to Florida, and got my instrument and beyond down there at a Part 141 school. That's changed ownership a couple times, but it was associated with a major carrier back then.
Okay.
Got all my ratings there, and they moved me back to the north. I started in New Jersey as a private pilot, Florida for my training after that, and then back to Massachusetts for one of their satellite bases as an instructor. So
sure,
that's the quick how I got into the pre-airline era of my flying.
So when you went into college, that wasn't on the radar per se. You went to college for something else, I assume.
Yep, I spent 2 years after college at a consulting firm doing boring retirement pension administration stuff.
Okay.
Spreadsheets. Yay. Doesn't that sound fun?
Not as fun as flying.
No.
I assume that you agreed.
When I told my boss I was quitting, he says, "Well, where are you going?" I said, "I'm gonna go try to be an airline pilot." He said, "I can't compete with that. Good luck." Good luck.
No, they can't. And so was there a point in that consulting where it wasn't consulting, it was pension stuff?
Yeah, it was a consulting firm. I did pension administration. It's super boring.
So was it just the boring part of it? Like, I needed something different. Was there something that triggered that, or just an interest?
Once I got my private, I thought you get done with your private rating, you feel like a superhero, right?
Yeah.
And that's all I wanted to do was get back into an airplane. That's all I could think about. And the more and more I talked myself through it, it's like, go do this. Go. I was young and the whole world ahead of me. So
sure.
It wasn't anything at the job that I liked what I was doing, but flying is way cooler than spreadsheets.
100%. Can confirm. So you go through the 141 path to get all these different ratings, and now you talk about you're up in Massachusetts doing instructing. Is that right?
Yep. Our school had a base up there. This was pre 1,500-hour requirement to get your ATP before we went to the airline. But the environment was, as aviation kind of goes through ups and downs in there, what you need to be competitive for a job.
Sure.
Normal, non-Part 141 sort of interview guaranteed. That's really all we were guaranteed. If you make it through, don't have any issues, get your time. We needed 1,000 hours and 100 hours of multi, and that guaranteed us an interview with one of several different carriers back then, all regional carriers. That's all it really got you. You weren't guaranteed a job as a flight instructor either. You had to interview for that after you got your ratings, and you had to do essentially a check ride with a chief pilot at the school as your final onboarding. You're going to be hired. Very regimented on how we proceeded through students. We started with instrument and private and worked our way up. But I did that for about 6 or 7 months before I became a check airman. Our school had examining authority, and we had stage checks. That still exists now in the Part 141 environment. I enjoyed doing that. I got enough time under my belt doing that and became an end-of-course instructor. I could do check rides. We had examining authority for private, instrument, and I want to say CFII, and the other check rides you had to go up with a designated examiner from the FAA. So commercial, commercial multi, commercial single, and your CFI. Actually, we had CFI initial, and we went up on our II ride with them. I think one or the other. But that was probably my favorite part about being an instructor was doing the end of course rides. It's nothing more enjoyable than watching somebody just do really well on a check ride and get a rating.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And to be able to shake their hand and say congratulations, that was really cool. So
I bet.
But, I ended up being up there for about 2 years before I got picked up my first regional carrier, an airline that is no more. It was a subsidiary of Delta called Comair. And some of your listeners may not have, it was gone in 2012. They went bankrupt. So
Okay.
it's been a few minutes since they've been around, but same as today, CRJ with Delta paint on it. It had our airline name on the side, not unlike what you would see today with
Sure.
the regional carriers and how they're associated. But I started there in 2005 and was pretty junior in my class. They went by age. In class, I think I was second from the bottom. And I went in thinking I was going to get JFK, which is what I wanted because I had friends and family up in that area that I was going to try to go back to. But instead, I was given the new base where I'm at today. That was 20 years ago, and I've never left. So,
okay.
I'm in North Carolina. I knew nothing about the state. I got my stuff in a U-Haul truck and drove down. A friend of mine and his wife had come down. They went apartment shopping and found a few of us different apartments. It was sight unseen. I'm moving in. And that was the start of my airline career, was on reserve in North Carolina at their maintenance base. And yeah, I'm sure you have questions about that transition.
So I do, as a matter of fact. So as you're getting into the 121 world with your regional, talk to us a bit about, like, what was the process like for you at the time? Like, what were the steps you had to go through? I assume there's some initial training and all that stuff.
So this is before Advanced Qualification Program, or AQP. I may have that acronym incorrect, but it was the kind of the old school approach. We did at least a month in classroom doing systems, way beyond what I've gotten in my recent airline. We did systems, but it was more at our own pace on an electronic flight bag type of thing, where we're doing computer-based training. Back then, it was in the classroom, 7-8 hour days, watching somebody talk to you about hydraulics and electronics, and which was in line. Our school was in line with that. We kind of had the same philosophy going through of breaking things down. They got us from day one at the flight school, and this is a benefit, I think, of Part 141 school that's associated with an airline. From an early stage of training, they're going to acclimate you and get you used to how things work. Checklist procedures, standard operating procedures, rules and regulations. Like, it's structured for a reason because it mirrors what you're going to see in a way. Obviously, you're flying a Skyhawk versus a jet. It's different, but there's a lot of similarities that can be drawn. So I think we were well prepared when we got to the airline. We all did well in the classroom, and then it moves into simulator training. Now, not having any really none virtually. I had no high performance time at all. I had 100 hours in a Seminole, which is almost like a Cherokee with a second engine. It's not very fast. This was all 6-pack. No, we had a small portion of our fleet had Garmin 430s, which is, back then, that to us, that was like the most amazing thing in the world.
Yeah, sure.
But most of our airplanes were 6-pack VORs, ILSs, old school NDB approaches. When we transitioned to the jet, the CRJ was, people hate it now. I get it. It has lived its life. But back then it was replacing Brazilias and Saberliners and Bandits. It was amazing for passengers, and for pilots it was new and the best thing out there. All glass, fast, 50 people versus 20, 25 people. You can get there twice as fast and comfortable, not in the the low levels. You were able to go up to normal jet altitudes. It was revolutionary at the time, but looking back, I get why people are kind of over that airplane at least.
Sure.
But the training was not easy. It was hard. Getting into a jet in a simulator where it was there, hey, you have these 10 lessons. At number 10 is your check ride. There is no, back then.
Wow.
This isn't, and I may be summarizing a little bit with the number of lessons, but it wasn't a ton of time. You weren't given, hey, let's work on that again. No. In fact, we had to go to Montreal to do our simulators because there were so many people training in the regional world back then. Simulator time was very hard to get. So I think over half of my class went to Canada for our training. And it was, hey, you're going home on this day. You're either not working for this company anymore because you didn't pass the check ride, or you're going to be starting IOE when you come back.
No pressure at all.
No. And I actually had a great friend of mine to this day. I was his first newbie student, no jet time. And that was a transition for both of us because he was only used to seeing experienced airline pilots.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you, there's a difference between an experienced airline pilot and a flight instructor with all GA prop time. Big difference. So I would say for anybody that's worried about that or getting prepared for that, they'll teach you what you need to know, but you need to show up with your A game. That's to this day. You still, there's the programs are designed a little bit differently now, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But you need to go into it prepared mentally for it to be a challenge. The old analogy, it's like drinking from a fire hose. It's like drinking from a fire hose with a blindfold on and making you run at the same time. They want a lot from you.
Okay. Do you have to juggle while you're doing that too, or?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, gotcha. So once you make it into that regional carrier, you said you're based down in North Carolina, on reserve to start. Talk to me a bit about what was the life like at that time of a young regional pilot?
Well, at first I was on reserve. Your seniority dictates what you can hold. Reserve is just simply you don't have a set of flights that you're assigned earlier in the previous month. You're assigned different work days with availability windows. Mm-hmm. And at the time we had a 90-minute call out. So if they called you at noon, you were expected to be there as early as 1:30, ready to work and get on a flight. Wow. It's a whole different world back then. The reserve roles at my current company are amazing compared to those. But
I was going to say 90 minutes doesn't seem like a lot of time to get that.
You basically have to be ready
out
to go all the time.
Yeah.
So you didn't have the benefit of being far from your base. So I started all my trips at the same airport at home, and I lived there. So there was really no such thing as not living in base back then. You either had to have a crash pad and be there all the time, or live there. So as my seniority got a little bit better, I got what we call a line. That's a schedule that's assigned about a month in advance. And, hey, these are the set trips you're going to go on. At the regional I was at, we normally did 3 to 5 day trips.
Okay. So
you leave on, say, a Tuesday and come back on Friday or Saturday. Wash, rinse, repeat. Do that a few times during the month. 3 to 4 times a month you would do that. The flying, probably about 80 to 90 hours a month. We flew a lot at our airline.
Okay.
And even on reserve, they worked you to the minimums, and then they kind of shut the spigot off. So you worked your at least 75 hours or so of flying time, and before you would, be cycled out and wait. But they found a way to make it where you were working every day. We had about 11 days off on reserve back then. Today, it's closer to 13 or 14 per month on reserve. So, yeah.
So I want to go back to something you said real quick.
Sure.
For those not familiar with you said 75 hours minimum, right?
Mm-hmm. That's a ballpark. That depends on the airline and the month and the number of days in the month. But sorry, go ahead.
But essentially, any airlines is going to have their minimum amount that you'll get paid for the month, even if you can't make that amount of hours, say if you're on reserve, right?
Yep. And that's the same for line holders too. So you're senior enough to hold a line, and the min line value may be, let's just throw out a number, it might be 72 hours. So they're going to construct a line for you that's at least 72 hours. So you can know that every month I'm getting paid for this amount. For reserve, it may be 70 to 80 hours, depending on the month and the type of reserve line you're on. But even if you don't fly on reserve, you're still getting that minimum pay.
Okay.
If you're a line holder and you are able to get rid of your trips, so we call that dropping trips, you are saying, I don't want to get paid unless you pick something else up. You're basically taking extra time off.
Okay.
Unlike reserve, you're going to work the days they need you to work. If you don't fly, you're still getting paid.
Got it. Okay.
And about 20% of every fleet and every seat, give or take 20 to 25%, is on reserve. That's how the airline works. If without it, the airline would stop working. It wouldn't make any sense. You have to have contingencies for sick calls, misconnects, equipment changes, you name it. There's a million reasons why you would need a reserve pilot, and it costs money, but that's the cost of doing business for the airline.
Sure. Makes sense. So once you get a line and you're saying 2 to 5 day trips, how many legs are you doing in a day, average, you think?
The regional I was at was 3 to 4 was normal. Some days you could do 5. I did have a day or two that I did 6. With longer routes that are associated with a jet, that probably isn't as common. The day I did 6, we did a Philly-Boston back and forth 3 times. So there was the 6 legs. And those, you're doing all the checklists, it's happening in a 30-minute flight versus a 2 or 3 hour flight. Okay. The longer days where you had longer legs, you may only do 2 legs. It just depends. It just depends on the way they've constructed the schedule and the way that the bidding system works. At most airlines today, it's taking an already accomplished schedule that the airline has constructed for marketing and for moving people around in the right equipment, and it turns that into schedules for each fleet type. So if your airline has 2 or 3 different airplanes, what routes and what times those airplanes are going to fly is already predetermined. The scheduling system for pilots matches that up with your min line value for the month and your request, like, hey, I want this weekend off, or I need this set of days off for a birthday, something. And it turns that into a schedule. It goes down from top to bottom in seniority order. It's another thing that we haven't talked about yet. Seniority at an airline is everything. It dictates your month-to-month schedule. It dictates your vacation, whether or not you can pick up additional trips with premium pay. It's everything at the airline, and that's based on your date of hire and how you fit into that class. Sure. Each seat, right and left seat, has its own seniority list, and depends on the base you're at and the equipment. So the airline I'm at now has too many seats to count, and your seniority may be really good in one seat and really bad in another one. Sure.
So is there anything else you want to talk about on the regional side before we transition into moving to controlling? Anything I missed that might be important?
If some of your listeners are looking into that, and that's part of their projected career path, I know there's people who complain about being at a regional and they're always looking for the next thing. There was a time when you spent an appreciable amount of time at a regional carrier. Okay. 5 to 15 years was normal, expected, customary. No one would feel like they were stuck in that. I don't think we'll go back to those type of time frames in this current environment. But and all this to say, when you do decide on where you're going, don't just take the first offer. You can shop. Try to find an airline that if I was here for, 5 or 6 years, is this a place that I would be happy working? Because you may not get your next job that fast. There's a whole generation of pilots being kind of conditioned right now to believe that it's normal to spend less than a year or 2 years at a regional carrier, and that's awesome that there's movement. It's great. But be aware that that's not always going to be the case, and you want to be somewhere that you enjoy working with people, you enjoy the bases, you enjoy the type of flying, you enjoy the plane, and it may be a few years that you're there. So keep that in mind. That's all I would add on that.
Good advice. Yeah, I think I've heard that a few times from folks as far as like trying to figure out, all right, which regional is going to be best for where I want to be. Specifically, there's been a few people I've talked to where they're like, I want to stay in the Midwest. I want to stay close to Minnesota. I'm going to apply for like Endeavor, Sun Country, airlines or regionals like that. And then they kind of go down the list from there, moving further out as
geography is
options change.
A big deciding factor. I mean, geography means, whether or not you're going to be a commuter or not. I was not a commuter for the first 2 years at the regional. My last 3 years I was, because they closed my base. and I got transferred to JFK and commuted through LaGuardia for 3 years. That was not as fun as being able to drive 15 minutes to my airport. So it's a big decision. Just don't make it based on, hey, this is the only place I can go.
Yeah.
Shop around. If you meet the requirements for one, you probably meet them for several, and you don't have to take the first thing that comes at you.
Good points. So at some point in your journey, you decide you want to try something a little different. Tell me a bit about that.
The industry decided for me that it was time to go.
Okay, I thought maybe that was going to be the case, but
the Comair was getting smaller from day one instead of getting bigger. Economic pressure and the relationship with the mainline carrier and a lot of other things contributed to the airline getting smaller. My chances of upgrading were near or zero. I was never going to upgrade there. In fact, when my first seniority number, I think I was 2,400. 5 years later, I was just broke 1,000. I was 900 and something on the seniority list. On day one, I was 3 years from an upgrade. And on my last day, I was 50 from furlough and no chance of upgrade.
Oof.
So if I could have upgraded there, I would have. There was never an opportunity for that.
Okay.
As the airline got smaller, people got downgraded from captain to first officer. And during that, the writing was on the wall. We're all losing our jobs. Where are we going? And instead of going to another carrier, which a lot of my friends did and classmates, I decided to look elsewhere. I tried to get on with NetJets. That did not work out. This was right after the 2008 stock market crash, which clearly affected corporate flying like NetJets. So that didn't work out. I was flying with a captain one night, and great guy from upstate New York says, "Hey, have you thought about air traffic?" And I said, "No. I thought that was only military that could do that." He says, "No, they're hiring off the street." And I said, "You're crazy." He says, "No, I'm telling you, look it up." So I tell the stories to anybody who will listen. The timing on that of flying with that captain was perfect because, as you know, air traffic, you have to be hired by a certain age.
Yep.
That night in the hotel, I went and filled out my application. I did all the things that should take you weeks. I did it as quick as I could. And that night in the hotel, the bid closed the next day. Had I not applied that night, the next opening bid, I would have been aged out and timed out.
Wow.
2 years later, after that night, I got my offer from the FAA. That's how long it took to get to that point.
Good grief.
And a few months after that, I would have aged out. So the process took a lot of time, but the timing worked out perfect because instead of being furloughed, I started at the Academy in Oak City.
Okay. That is really interesting. I think it's crazy sometimes, like the weird twists of fate where you're flying with this captain, you decide, all right, this is the thing, and I'm going to go and fill out the application, and it's just...
And you think nothing's going to happen. It's often this, internet black hole for months before you hear anything. Like, wait a second, I forgot I even did this. It took so long. But yeah, timing was airline driven. And there was no future there, and my choices were go elsewhere and I chose the FAA, and I'm lucky to get picked up and all the things. But it kept me in aviation. It kept me doing what I love. I loved being involved in aviation, and I thought that was a natural fit. And not to sound negative, but I was a little bit burnt at the time. I invested 5 years at Comair, and it went nowhere. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that again somewhere else. Several of my friends have, they've been to 2 or 3 before they landed where they're at today. Okay. I didn't have that in me at the time. I didn't have it in me. So the FAA was.
So off to Oklahoma City you go.
Yep. That was a few months out there. I kind of try to make this analogy for the students in aviation. Leaving Oak City, you've basically gotten to the point where you can solo.
Okay.
You know enough to take off, land, and get back safely. But the real training happens afterwards at your facility. And for me, I was a trainee for 30 months. Of that, I trained for about 12 of those 30 months. The other 18 months, I was staffing in the positions that I had been certified on. Okay. I got, by luck again, I got back to my home in North Carolina. Didn't have to move. that was another awesome, just luck on my part.
Because I suppose at the federal level, you're kind of at the, what are the needs of the government right now, and where do we need controllers, right?
They did it a little bit differently back then, and it's changed throughout the years, and it's not to say it won't change again. But back then, when I applied, they said, hey, if you could pick 2 states in the United States that you would work in, what would they be? Okay, you give them 2 states. North Carolina, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I have family on the West Coast, California.
Okay.
And they told you, hey, when we have a need for a facility in one of those 2 states, we'll call you back. That's how it worked.
Okay.
And then when you got your initial offer, they told you what facility you were being offered. You knew that before you went to the academy.
Well, that's pretty cool then.
Today, you don't find out where you're going until the last day of the academy.
Okay.
And it could be wherever they need people that day. And
so I envision federal employment, and I think back to my military days where they said, here's a dream sheet. You can fill out all the places you'd like to be stationed. We're not going to send you to any of those places, but you can dream.
Right. In fact, tell us the places you don't want to go, because maybe then we'll do a little bit of reverse psychology. It's actually not that, it's not like that at all in the FAA.
Okay.
With some very rare exceptions, you won't be forced out of the place that you start. So once you start somewhere, and if you wanted to stay, you could theoretically stay there forever. They're not going to move you unless that facility closed.
Gotcha. Okay.
If there are facilities with nobody wants to work there, they won't force people that are already checked out and certified somewhere to go there. That's not really a thing either.
Okay.
Unlike the military, hey, we need people in this base.
Right.
Guess what, Junior?
Guess
going.
Where you're going.
Yeah, it's not like that in the FAA.
Okay.
Which worked out well. I was able to stay in at my hometown. So
that's awesome.
Same commute to the airport.
Just going to a different place at the airport.
Yep, every day instead of once a week. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk a bit more about that training process. So you said it, and I think I kind of knew this already, but it takes years to get fully qualified at your facility, right?
Yep, and that depends on a lot of things. Your ability, the staffing at the facility, who can train you. For instance, at my facility, we had three positions in the tower, and on paper, there's 8 positions in the radar room, but it really boils down to 3 different positions down there.
Okay.
When you get certified on even just clearance up in the tower, clearance, ground, and local are the 3 positions that you're going to train on. When you get your first one, now when you come to work, instead of you being this useless trainee who can't do anything by themselves, you could be used for staffing on the position you're certified on.
Got it.
That helps people get time off. That helps the whole system work for breaks. So you become incrementally more valuable as you get more experience, which slows down your training.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's why if there's controllers listening, they might be screaming. That's not the only reason it happens. There are definitely facilities that do better at that than others. And over the years, the FAA has gotten better at prioritizing the training and saying, hey, okay, RH has clearance and ground, but he needs to finish the tower. Like, he needs training. And they've prioritized that.
Okay.
And there's more metrics that are available to people to hit those target goals, which is good. That's been positive change over the years. If I started today with the experience I had, I probably would have been able to certify in half the calendar time just because of the way they've prioritized training now.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I suppose, too, even without that staffing consideration part of it, there's a lot of intricacies with each individual airspace, right, that you have to become familiar with?
Yep. You start with classroom. You learn the airspace, memorize everything while you're learning to speak the language. And a lot of people are starting that with no aviation background at all. Their minimal time at the academy, they learned how to do the voice commands for the computer and how to speak the language a little bit. They're at a 3rd grade level when they leave. When you certify, you're ready to graduate high school at least. You've moved on and you've learned a lot more. So each position has its own list of things you have to learn and demonstrate with live traffic. Your first time training, outside of some really basic voice, person to person in a classroom setting, your real training is with live traffic. Today in the FAA, everywhere you go, you can assume there's training happening. Probably on the position you're talking to. There's training all the time. If you hear that second voice come on, It's not a supervisor. It's not their boss. It's the trainer coming on.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, each position has, could be 50 to 150 hours of time on each position, maybe a little bit more. And when your training team, which is usually made up of 2 to 3 controllers, thinks you're ready for that position, they recommend you for certification, and your check ride's accomplished by your supervisor, who's been watching you every day from, the back of the room. It's like flying with a check airman for your entire training. They know everything about you by then. I don't want to say it's a formality, but when they plug in for a check ride, they wouldn't do it if they didn't think you were ready.
Gotcha.
And your team wouldn't recommend you unless you're ready. So at our facility, we progress through the tower. Then you go back out to Oak City for radar training, which is about a month.
I guess I didn't realize that. I just assumed that was all in-house at the facility.
Nope. You have to now, some facilities only have towers, so they'll never go back.
Okay.
Most Charlies in the NAS are, I say, up-down. They have a tower upstairs and a radar room downstairs. That's where that term comes from.
Okay.
And they're now, today, no matter what your background, you have to go to training at the academy for both.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. So came back from that and started on radar training. Again, once you're able to open up a position by yourself, you're certified on, say, South Radar, you're more valuable. You are somebody getting out of there early that day, or somebody called out sick. You're a body for that day instead of training. But you progress through that room, and once you got all the positions, you're fully certified. You're on your own all the time. You're never plugged in with a trainer anymore. Being a pilot was not as helpful as you would think when you're doing air traffic training.
Okay. That was next thing I was going to ask you, as far as how the pilot side of things like translated within the ATC world.
You cannot fly the plane from the radio. And I was guilty of that, or trying to do that, for a long time.
Okay.
I finally let it go and stopped putting myself in the airplane and putting them in places that I thought I would have wanted based on my experience. That is a kind of a game you play in your head, and it doesn't really work. You kind of have to set aside the flying part when it comes down to learning that job.
Gotcha. Okay.
The opposite, I think, is true from leaving air traffic and going back to the pilot world. I think that experience is extremely beneficial in situational awareness. I could draw a picture of what's happening just by the words I'm hearing on the radio. Whereas, not to say they're not aware, but most pilots are concerned about their immediate vicinity and what's happening with their flight path and their clearances, or I can't turn it off. I'm painting a picture of, several airplanes at one time. And that's helped me so far coming back, I think.
Nice. Yeah, I was going to say that, is there a part of you that thinks that, I've heard that, it takes a certain type of, thought process or mentality to be able to imagine where all these aircraft are in space. And not only that, but where are they going? Where are they going to be in a couple minutes? To be able to put all those pieces together. Do you find that it takes a certain kind of person to be able to accomplish that?
Yes, but you would be surprised at how different controllers are from, one shift to the next. The movies make it sound like everybody's the same, they're all different versions of, age or, where they're from is really all that makes it. No, there are really different personalities. Some people that, I don't know. Yeah, it's hard to describe. When they plug in and they start talking, I think it's more common to be surprised that person is doing that.
Okay.
When they unplug, it's like, who are you? How, you've met controllers over your span in aviation. They're all different, I think, which I think pilots fall into they're a lot alike. Pilots are, generally speaking, similar. I would not say that about controllers.
Interesting.
But you're right. It does take a certain kind of person to do that, and a certain mindset, and you have to be able to think on your feet.
Yeah.
You have to be able to solve a new problem every hour, all the time, and not let that bother you. You're not going to have seen this problem. You won't see this one ever again, and the one I'm asking you to solve now, you've never seen before. You have to solve it. And the solution is everybody gets to where they're going on the ground, departures, overflights safely. Solve it. As a trainer, which I did in air traffic world, and I'm careful how I say this because I don't want to offend any instructors, CFIs out there. Training somebody in air traffic is infinitely more difficult than training somebody in the airplane.
I would 100% believe that.
Infinitely more difficult. And a lot of it has to do with having to have a little bit of mind reading ability. In an airplane, I ask you to do a slow flight, stalls, whatever. Intercept this course, do an approach. That's what you're going to do. It's predictable, right? In air traffic, you're plugged in and you have the ability to step on them and cut off their microphone or push them out of the way. Sometimes that's easier. Get out. But you have to let them work the problem.
Sure.
So you may have to get a little, okay, tell me what your plan is here, because I don't feel like watching this and wondering. Sometimes there's time for that. Sometimes there is no time for that. You have to trust them. Trust is difficult to get, but very easy to lose when they start making the wrong decisions.
Like, what are you doing?
I think it's harder to train as a controller. It's difficult as in the CFI world. I get it. I went there, been there, done that. All this stuff. If you're on it and you hear somebody training and you hear the other voice come on occasionally, take a deep breath before you lose your mind and realize they're both going through something over there. They're trying to work this out. There has to be learning happening. So,
I mean, how else do you learn other than experiencing it and making mistakes? And
yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, it's how much room do you give them to make the mistake? And a good trainer, I think, lets them solve the problem they created. Yeah. Instead of, all right, there's too many things going on that need to be fixed. The more comfortable you get with your trainee and with your job, I think the more latitude you can give them. Let them dig a hole, but let them dig out too. That's why I think it's harder to be on the trainer side in air traffic. Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, it's not so much that one little mistake is going to put airplanes dangerously close. If you're letting it get that far, then your skills as a trainer need to be honed a little bit. You should be able to understand, all right, this is going in the wrong direction. If I don't say something now, it's going to get to a point where I can't fix this and it's unsafe. So there's always that verge of, all right, it's just inefficient, which is okay. Pilots don't like it, but I'd rather you be inefficient while you solve this than unsafe while you solve this problem.
Right, sure.
That's the difference.
Makes sense. So you did both the tower and the radar room. Did you have a preference?
Radar all day, every day. Never go to the tower. And that's because our facility was, some people may not like this. It was probably 80% of your work was done in the radar room at our level of facility and the traffic we worked. 80% of the volume, the complexity, if you want to call it the stress of the job. And I enjoyed that. It made the day go by faster. You could be more creative in the radar room. Our tower was relatively slow, proceduralized in a way that kind of took away some of your creativity. The SOP would dictate you do certain things. It kind of tied your hands on being super efficient. We spent a lot of time waiting around for the next things to happen up there. And I spent a lot of time wondering, what am I missing? Because all of your work in radar is presented in front of you. It's on the screen or strips on the side. You know what's next. You know what's coming. And if you're, happen to be slow for a few minutes, daydreaming, you look back, you're not missing anything. It's all right in front of you. In the tower, when you spend, 9 out of 10 minutes not doing anything, it's like, what am I missing? Like, I'm used to being busier than this. That's why I didn't like going up there. But on certain days, I kind of looked at it as a break to go up there. But in general, if I was given the choice, and some supervisors would let you pick which, we typically went up or down for the whole day. The whole shift. If they let me pick, I'm always picking radar. If I didn't pick radar, it's because of the people in the room that I maybe didn't want to work with that day. That happens.
Oh, yeah, 100% that happens.
So yeah.
Totally get that. Is there something you found like particularly rewarding about controlling?
A difficult final problem is rewarding. When you get through it and you don't have, an extra 1 or 2 miles between airplanes, you have separation requirements met, nobody got delayed, and you obviously didn't have any separation issues that are going to cause you a conversation with your supervisor later on. When you got through a difficult problem, because it's different every day at that type of airport, that was rewarding. I liked getting done with, an hour or 2 hour session of solid problems to solve and get through that without creating more that I made. I did find that rewarding.
How about biggest challenges in that space?
So at the airport I worked at, the traffic was the whole spectrum. We had student pilots all the way up to commercial, airline pilots and military pilots. So I think the most difficult thing was tempering your approach to each specific type of audience.
Okay.
And I can't go as fast. I can't maybe sound a little less friendly when I'm working with a student pilot because everything's new. Everything's super big, bad, scary controller.
Yes. You guys are terrifying when you first
Terrifying. I think that was the biggest challenge is, you have to shift gears throughout the entire session because we're talking to all of them. It wasn't unusual to have GA traffic on one of our parallels with, jets passing them on the left. It takes patience and a little bit of finesse to do that without getting frustrated at the ones that don't respond instantly. Mm-hmm. Don't necessarily do exactly what you said or it takes them a little bit longer to do it. That was probably the biggest challenge in our airspace.
Okay. So I want to move on to where you're at now, and you made the move away from ATC back into the airlines over at Penguin.
Okay.
Was there like a pivotal moment where you're like, I want to get back into the air, or was it something else that drew you back into the airlines?
So COVID is a big reason on why it was even possible for me.
Okay.
Because of the shifts in aircraft and personnel available post-COVID and during COVID that created these, perceived shortages of pilots. I started getting these postcards in the mail from regional carriers. I'm on some list of, I have my ATP. So,
yeah,
this was a few years ago now, but they were sending you this, hey, if you want to start in the left seat, that's the captain's seat. This is how much bonus money you'll get. If you have this amount of experience, this many $1,000s in bonus. And, the more experience you had, well, I had the experience. It was older. It was a long time ago. The last time I had been in a jet for the airlines was in 2010. And this started probably 22 timeframe, 2022.
Okay.
I got kind of reintroduced to this. So we're post-COVID. Airlines are scrambling to fill with qualified applicants, which there's a higher bar now to go from, your flight instructing or time building days to get to the airline. You know that. You need the ATP, which I had, which makes me marketable. And so that's what kind of planted the idea in my head. I had dinner with a friend of mine who's at another major carrier. Hey, when can you retire? And that's the start of something more, right? He's not just curious when I can retire.
Right.
It's not for a few years. And he's like, what are you going to do when you retire? Well, I have time. In air traffic, you have to retire at 56. Airline world, you don't have to retire until 65 today. And I said, I'll have a long time left to go back to the airlines and I'll have a pension. So I'll think about it then. And you keep getting those postcards every day and a couple other friends texted me, hey, what are you thinking? Are you going to ever go back to the airlines? And it kind of turned into, yeah, I do actually want to try that because I'm trying to be optimistic about this. I know that the climate won't look like this at the time forever.
Yeah.
I have currency. I had been flying a jet. I was doing a little bit of part-time stuff on the side, Part 91 in a beach jet. So my logbook was the best it was ever going to look with my full-time ATC job. So I thought, if I'm going to do this, this is the time. Like every day that goes by, I'm further away from some of this jet time. My currency is going to be the red flag if I try to do this, right?
Okay.
So I made a run for it, and there were a couple leaves in the path, and I ended up where I'm at today with the help of a network of people that I knew. My foot was in the door with my experience, but a lot of people helped me get that interview because they knew me, they had flown with me. I do think it's important to mention the importance of networking to your audience.
Yeah.
Every job, you're going to meet people that you're going to fly with or somehow run into later on in your career. You're going to fly with somebody you think is I'll never see this person again. I don't care what they think of me. Okay. 4 out of 5 people, that may be true, but there's one that it may matter later on. Mm-hmm. So build the relationships early on. And that's why you're getting your training, your instructors. They could be the ones sitting on the other side of the interview table in a few years. You just never know. Right. Anyway, I was lucky to have really good friends that helped me get my foot in the door with the right people. And, my experience looked good on paper. I did not interview at a regional carrier. I interviewed with my airline today, and that's where I got hired. I'm very, very lucky to have that opportunity. Today, without my last year of flying, I've been at the airline now for about a year. Without that time, so my same resume as I had on interview phase pre-moving back, mm-hmm. I would not be hired today, period. I don't have what they want today. So
interesting.
I've been asked like, hey, how'd you time that? I didn't. It was luck. It was luck. If I waited and I dragged my feet and said, oh, I'll find a reason not to do this, the opportunity would have been gone and my currency may have suffered and made me less marketable when they do pick up and start hiring in the same volume. One day it'll go back. It'll be ups and downs like always.
Yeah.
You cannot time this industry. Today is the day to do it. And if you're ready and you have your hours and they just don't happen to hire in that month or that year, keep working. Keep doing what you're doing to build your time. Because one day they're going to be, and you'd rather have your time and be ready and have a solid resume with a solid group of people you've met and a good network than to sit on the sidelines and say, I'm not going to do it until this. If you wait until that day to start, it'll be too late.
Yeah. I hear so many people talk about networking and especially like the non-transactional connections you can make with people where you're not necessarily trying to leverage this networking opportunity with somebody because it's going to benefit you down the road, but just being a genuine, kind person, being decent and treating people respectfully and just building your network that way. It seems like that pays off more often than not.
Yeah, be responsible, be accountable, step up to the position. You have a lot of responsibility, no matter if you're flying 2 people or 300 people. The way you carry yourself is how people will remember you later on. Even if it's your first job, take them all seriously. Nothing is a stepping stone. You may be there for a while, maybe the longest stepping stone or phase of your career, but do good in making your character stand out. And I think that pays dividends later on.
So when you moved into your current airlines, what was different as you made this move into your airlines as opposed to when you first went to the regional?
So when I left the regional, it was all paper, Jeppesen charts on a clip on the side of the airplane.
Oh, God.
Which the clip is still there. We just use it for like holding a pen or piece of paper. And now everybody has a suction cup with an EFB. So EFB I'd never been in that world. Everybody says, oh, it's so much easier. Who cares? It's not a big deal. It is a big deal when you're trying to learn how to manipulate all these things that someone who has a quarter of my experience, I watch them and they're flying through this stuff. And I feel like the old guy who can't figure out how to do, Control P to make a print, something print. I'm over here struggling trying to figure out how to navigate. That was a big change. Okay. The structure of initial training in the classroom was different. We did 2 weeks of basic indoc, which was company policies and big picture stuff, zoom out. And before we went to our fleet training, and a lot of that was done on your own time on a computer. And when you reported back, you did a few more days in the classroom with some testing, but it wasn't a ton like it was back in my Comair days. So you had to show up on day one of real training, kind of ready to go. Like they expected you to know this stuff when you got there. So you take some initial tests to verify that you did actually study while you were on your break, and then right into sims. The sim world and the tone was opposite, 180 degrees difference from the regional days. They treated you a little more like a professional than someone they were waiting to determine if they wanted to keep or not.
Okay.
They wanted you to do well. They taught you the things that they recognized that you maybe needed a minute on. I was really lucky to have a captain upgrade from that fleet, which is important because you may be flying with somebody who's never been in that fleet. They're upgrading on an entirely new piece of equipment, which puts them in their own learning phase. This guy was coming from the seat I was in, and prior to that, he had been on the same type of airplane I flew at Comair. So when he was watching me like really struggle, like with formulating a question, he'd pause. He said, "I know where you're at. I know what you're thinking." That was awesome because I didn't have to explain it to him. I didn't have to translate. Hey, back in the CRJ, this is what I'm thinking. He said, "I get it."
He got it then.
Yep. He understood. He went through the same curve when he got to a Boeing is different than a CRJ. There's no other way to say it. The computers are different. The structure and logic of all the systems is different. And how you actually fly the plane and manipulate it for each phase of flight is a lot different. So I was learning all those things and the CFB over here.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe somebody coming from another airline, all that stuff is natural to them. They're just learning the procedures for that airline. I was learning a new airline to me, a new type of airplane, this really awesome technology that I had never seen before. And it took all of my abilities to get through that. It was not easy. I'll just say it that way. It was hard.
This is a question. I don't mean to be offensive, but did you find it as more of an adult learner to be more challenging?
I think if I didn't have, let's see, I started with almost 25 years of experience in aviation. Now, I don't discount my time as a controller. I mean, that I'm speaking the language every day for day in and day out. Had I not had that background, sure, I think it is harder to learn things as you get older. That experience in aviation in general is probably all that got me through it. Like all those, I know how to study. I know what I need to do to get through a maneuver. I know how to study the flows of a procedure. If this was all new today at my age, I'm not that old, by the way.
We're probably not that far off from each other.
It would have been more difficult. So I can appreciate that. The 25-year-old crowd, good on them. They grew up in the glass cockpit. They may have never even seen a six-pack. It processes different to them. Now that's sort of an interesting angle on this too. My fleet is mostly steam, not glass. I have some glass, but it's an older fleet. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. I mean, there's two little tiny glass screens, but it's, it's a late 80s product. It's the beginning of glass. And it's not like what a big screen MFD and PFD looks like today. So yeah, that actually might have helped me a little bit because I was kind of accustomed to that. But so everybody's learning in their, that each, what you would think would be an easy element, it may be a challenge for some people. The stuff that's, hey, I don't get this. Like the guys next to me that had never flown with a six-pack or any steam. Yeah, this is how this works, So we can kind of benefit from each other on that. But I'm not that old. I just repeat that.
All right, back to On Track. Sorry, now that I've wholly offended you by calling you old.
You didn't ask me how it was to get free time at the senior citizens home.
So with your AARP membership, is it easier to...
Do you get a senior discount on crew meals?
Yeah. So what kind of flying are you doing now with your airlines?
So my class was offered a couple different fleets. My company has 5 different fleet types, or fleet common types, I guess you would say. And they offered 3 of them to my class. And one of them I'm on now. I'm on the 757 and 767. Our airline flies both. It's the similar type rating. And there were 4 spots offered for, my class was 52 people. And I was 13 in my class, so I figured I had a chance at it. So I took it. And some people were like, you're crazy. Why would you want to go fly that? It's so old. It's an old airplane. Because it's the 7.5 and it's amazing. So our fleet is the Swiss Army knife of this company, I think, the way I look at it. We do some domestic, more in the wintertime.
Okay.
The 767 doesn't do domestic. There's a couple exceptions to that, but very rarely. Most of the 767 on my fleet is going to Europe. So we do a ton of Europe in the summertime. That's where I spent most of 2024 was transatlantic on the 767. A few times transatlantic on the 757. And any domestic stuff I did was on the 757. We do have the 300. We use that pretty much hub to hub. And the 75200 would kind of bounce around between hubs and some other select cities. But
okay.
Yeah, this week I'm going on a domestic trip. I haven't been on a domestic trip in a few months. I'm actually doing that for currency, which is actually, I didn't understand how this would be a challenge on my fleet, but with the international stuff, there's 3 pilots, a captain, and 2 first officers.
Okay.
And one of them is the international relief officer, and I was in that role about half of my flying time so far at this airline. In that role. So I'm not the flying pilot going or coming back from Europe. I'm up there the whole flight except for my break, which we rotate a break. But I'm not at the flying controls except for when I'm giving somebody else a break. So it's at cruise. So I can't log any of those landings. And when we get to our 90 days or close to it, the company reaches out and says, hey, you need landings. Okay. So we have a pretty easy way to find trips that match up with your next set of reserve days, which I'm still in reserve. I'm basically in the same seniority boat I was in when I started.
Okay.
I haven't moved up or down. It's pretty much the same. Just the way my fleet sits compared to the other fleets. A lot of people come here before they go somewhere else. So for every person that says junior to me, somebody senior to me comes, and I kind of get sandwiched in the same little zone I'm in.
Gotcha.
But yeah, it's hard to say what type of flying. I'm all over Europe, all over the United States, Hawaii. We do some Caribbean flying, very little, and we do South America. I've been there twice now to Peru.
Okay.
This fleet out of another base does a few more South American cities. But yeah, it's a really cool fleet to be on if you want to see new places, and it's really cool.
Do you have a favorite destination you've had so far?
I love London, but because I've been there the most, I went 17 times in 2024. Now that there's a list of reasons why that isn't the place people would choose to go to, mostly because that's where they went in their first few years and they'd just rather go to other places. But
okay.
I do love London. It's really nice. I haven't been to a city that I didn't like that I wouldn't go back to. Another one that sticks out that I think is really cool is Zurich. The views going in and out of there are awesome with the mountains.
I suppose.
Yeah. I got a trip to Berlin. That was cool. Different feel than Munich. A little more city-like there. But it's cool. We land. We typically have time to take a nap and meet up for dinner. And in that, somewhere in that first day, because you're leaving the next day, go find something to do. Go be a tourist for a little bit, walk around. Sometimes we have 2 days over there, which is really nice. My last long overnight was in Morocco. Got to check the Africa continent off on my list. We were there for 48 hours, so we had time to actually go out and do something for a full day. We did a day tour out to these waterfalls, and the highlight of that trip is a monkey ate peanuts out of my hand.
That's awesome.
So that was a highlight. I will remember that one for a while.
I bet.
So
what are some of the pros and cons of what you're doing now?
I mean, being in an airline and flying awesome equipment to great cities, it's hard for me to find a complaint in that. But if you're making me do it, you're telling me there has to be a con. Airline flying it means you're gone, and you're not always home. You're not going to be home every day. When you're gone, gone. And that's when things start to break or kids get sick or something happens. So that's a con. Sometimes sleep is an issue. That's a challenge on this fleet. You're basically doing a trip and skipping a night of sleep. You get a break on that flight, but we're normally flying overnight to get to Europe.
Okay.
And normally when you'd be sleeping, so if you get 2 or 3 hour break, great, but you're still coming over there and you're a little bit tired. You do get a chance to get a good night's rest before you come home. And it's normally a longer flight coming back, so there's a fatigue issue. I, for some reason, knock on wood, have been it's easy for me to acclimate back to East Coast time when I get home. I just need one night at home, and the next day I sort of tell myself, this is it, I'm back. You never get acclimated to the Europe time, but you did skip a day of sleeping. And since you told me I was so old before, I think that might be a little more challenging as I get older. For now, I'm dealing with it pretty well, though. The crews I'm flying with are really cool people. I've met really good crews. I don't have anybody I would not want to fly with again. The good thing about this fleet is if you didn't like somebody, guess what? You're only doing 2 legs with them because you're going over and you're coming back. And you get a break in there sometimes, so you're not really stuck up in the cockpit with the same person for 5 days, which happened at the regionals, and that could be great, but it could be really terrible too, because you're on day 1 of a 5-day trip and you already don't like the person.
Like, oh, I'm done with you already.
This is gonna be rough. So it's a great job, man. It's hard to find complaints about it. It really is.
That's awesome.
I'm so lucky.
And you are never gonna let me live down that old thing, are you?
Nope. We walked right into that.
Well, what advice do you have for others who are looking to make a switch into a career in aviation?
Don't wait. Do your homework. Find somebody that can serve as a mentor, that can help you navigate some of the things that you think you might know something about, but maybe you don't. Ask questions. Ask, more than one person. Get somebody's perspective that's done, hey, the CFI route. It's easier to find them because it's one of the most common ways to build your flight time. Find somebody who went in another direction building their time, skydiving or sightseeing or pulling banners around. Find somebody who went the corporate route, got all their experience in the corporate world, never went to an airline. You might hear something that they do that hey, you know what? That sounds better than my other friend who was flying for the airlines. Like, don't limit yourself to one option early. If it comes down to you really want to fly airplanes, there's a lot of different ways you can do that and have an awesome career. So, but it comes with asking the right questions. If I could go back to the beginning,
I didn't really young, right?
Yeah, I didn't really. I went into it kind of thinking this is always going to be awesome. There's never going to be any downtimes, which is weird because it was post 9/11 and that destroyed the industry in terms of career movement and hiring prospects and competitive nature of the jobs. But I was still like, nothing bad will ever happen to me. You need to be prepared for that. Aviation is intrinsically tied to the economy, and when it goes down, flying goes down. And I wish I would have had a better understanding of that. It probably would have led to less. There was a little bit of bitterness when I was about to be furloughed. I thought I deserved and was entitled to. I gave you 5 years of my life, and now what do I get? You're about to be furloughed. That's all you get. Be open to that. I'm not saying it's all doom and gloom, but you need to realize that that's a possibility out there. And when you do it, commit to it, and don't let what's happening today affect your optimism for something that you're working towards that's years away. It takes a while to get your ratings. It takes a while to get that 1,500 hours you need to get into a commercial carrier. So be ready for the long haul.
Good advice.
Hopefully it helps somebody.
Well, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to sit down and chat with me on this episode of Fly the Transition. And I wish you all the best in your endeavors.
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me and giving me a chance to talk about this awesome career. I appreciate it.
Well, a huge thank you to RH for coming on this episode of Fly the Transition. I really am humbled to have the opportunity to have him on and be able to tell a bit of his story to, again, hopefully inspire others, not just on the pilot side, but even in that space where he talked about air traffic control for a while, the path to get there, and the rewards of that profession as well. So a lot to be taken away from this episode, and I'm just really grateful that he took the time to sit down and chat with us. And again, if for some reason you have not listened to Opposing Bases, I highly suggest you go check those guys out. You can find them on Apple, Spotify, or any other podcast player by just searching Opposing Bases, or you can go to their website, opposingbases.com. So as I wrap up this episode, if you like what I'm doing or you want to be a guest on a future episode, go ahead and leave me an email at flythetransition@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on any of my social medias, which will be down in the show notes of this episode. And if you haven't done so already, I sure would appreciate if you'd leave me a rating and review wherever you're listening to this podcast. It certainly does help spread the podcast and our message to others. Or you can just use the good old-fashioned word of mouth and tell all your aviation friends to come check us out over here at Fly the Transition. Thank you all so much for joining me on this episode of Fly the Transition, and until next time, keep your eyes on the skies and your dreams soaring high.
You've been listening to Fly the Transition. Life is too short for you not to do what you love. And our passion is to give you all the tools you need to make the transition from doing what you do to being in the aviation industry. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, you can reach out by email at flythetransition@gmail.com. Find us on Facebook at Fly the Transition. And the website for Flying Midwest Media is flyingmidwest.com. Keep soaring. See you next time on Fly the Transition.